There we go. Okay. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Steve Gompertz, one of the founding partners of QRx Partners, along with Mark Swanson, who's going to really be doing most of the talking today. I'm here for color commentary, but this should be a really good discussion. If you've been watching our posts playing up where we're going with this, I think ISO 9000, as Mark will show you, is an important element of your quality management standards, but often forgotten about. People focus on 9001 or 1345 because that's what the certificate says. But as Mark's going to explain, 9000 is the foundation for those, and you really need to understand what's in it to understand any of the other quality management as well as several other standards where the same terminology is used throughout, and this is where it's established. So should be very interesting today.
And while we'll talk about a bunch of what's in the current version of 9000, the 2015 edition, I'll also finish up with why I think ISO 9000 actually going to become more important in the next edition of the standard. And I think that's, to me, what's driving getting this information out to people, making sure that people understand where the things were and how much more important it's going to be in this next edition. So. Okay. And Steve, again, and the rest of you too, if you have questions as we go along, please, raise your hand, put them in the chat, those types of things. We'll pick them up as we go along. Rather than waiting for all of them at the end, it's best to, I think, to ask the questions when the material's right in front of you at the time that I'm saying it. So feel free to, again, raise your hand or put in the chat if you have questions. Okay. So ISO 9000. ISO 9000 really is what we should be talking about as the granddaddy for all of the quality management standards. Sometimes, as Steve said, people point to 9001 as kind of being the big brother and that kind of stuff. But 9000 really is the fundamentals and concepts. Um, and we'll talk about some more of that as we're going along. We'll talk about what's coming in the next edition. Um, Again, you're going to see this is going to be greatly expanded and a lot more information in the next edition of 9000. And we'll cover that more towards the end. I just wanted to kind of give people then, when it's coming. Right now, it looks like it's still staying on the original 24-month timeline. 9001 has been delayed a little bit due to some technical revisions and stuff that people had a lot of questions about. So they're actually going to a second committee draft rather than going straight forward to towards publication, FDIS and DIS and FDIS. So ISO 9000 looks like it still should be published in December of 2025. So that's next year. So again, fairly quick timeline, but it looks like it's on schedule to meet that timeline. Okay, so December 2025, look for the next edition of this. Okay. As to what it has, everybody I think recognizes that it does have terms and definitions. And terms and definitions is in the 2015 edition has been the lion's share of what's there. Now, what I'll say to that is that's fine, but terms and definitions can also be found on the ISO online browsing platform, and we will put that in the chat as soon as I can type it in there. ISO.org/OBP, the online browsing platform. So you can go there, and I'm sorry, I just didn't get it to everybody. Bear with me. So ISO.org/OBP, the online browsing platform, is a place that you can go search all of ISO standards for definitions. And so you don't need 9000 for the definitions. As the US FDA is transitioning to the Quality Management System Regulation, QMSR, this is one of the things that we've been talking about, saying that, look, you don't need to worry about the definitions that come with the normative reference to 2015 edition of 9000. You can go to the online browsing platform and look up all the definitions. So to me, 9000 is I mean, yeah, it has some other concepts and connections of the terms, the diagrams of those things. But for the definitions themselves, you can go to the online browsing platform. What I'm going to talk about is more importantly is actually section 2 of ISO 9000. And section 2 is these three sections of fundamental concepts, the quality management principles, and then it actually gives you instructions on developing your QMS. You can imagine how valuable that is for new organizations and that kind of stuff, and even mature organizations to look back at how the experts said, this that you can best develop your QMS. Okay, and so those are the things to focus on of what's in ISO 9000. All right, so we'll talk about the fundamental concepts. Um, there are 5 that were outlined in the 2015 edition. This is where we're going to spend most of the second half of this presentation on, is because that 5 goes to more than 20. And so explaining these fundamental concepts and being able to bring this information to your organization to explain those concepts will be, I think, invaluable as we go forward with the next edition of ISO 9000. Okay. But you can imagine, and people often talk about, well, there's no definition of quality. Well, it explains the concept of quality in ISO 9000. Okay. It explains the concept of what is meant by a quality management system. And this is the interrelated processes of for accomplishing quality management and the goals, the objectives of the quality management system. Okay. It explains the fundamental concept of the context of your organization and what that means. And so when auditors come and ask you what's the context of your organization, ISO 9000 explains what that is, what that means. The idea and the concept of interested parties. Um, and I know that there are some auditors out there that will ask about, have you identified your interested parties? Well, you have to know what that concept means in order to be able to identify them, right? And ISO 9000 has been bringing that to you. And
I,
then,
if I could just interject real quick, Mark, those last two, context of the organization, interested parties, I think are so important, and then people are unaware of them, because they don't tend to look at 9,000. I've gone on various talks and talked to conferences. I gripe about buying a QMS out of a box, right? Where I
right,
explain it isn't possible. And these are the two reasons, right? Because above, we've just explained what quality is, then it explains what a quality management system is. How do you come up with your quality management system? Depends on what you know about context of your organization and the interested parties. There is not a one size fits all. So I think these two sections in particular are ones everybody really needs to understand well if you're going to determine if your quality system is suitable and adequate, right? We always focus on the effective part. We forget about how do you determine if it's suitable, effective, and adequate has to do with those two issues right there.
well, and then the last part of this, that support piece, has to do with your implementation, right? And so you have to talk about the people and the resources, the necessary competence, this whole concept of awareness, communications and planning. All of those pieces are the support things that go underneath your QMS. And so to bring that all forward, um, these all work together as the foundation, right? That's why they're called the fundamental concepts. So, all right. Questions on these fundamental concepts and this is the current edition of 9000, right? The 2015 edition that has these 5 things in here. Um, I'm Again, when I talk about the changes, this is the major area that a lot of changes are coming in, and we'll cover that towards in the second half of this webinar.
I wish I had thought to put together a poll because I'd be real curious, and maybe people can just do it with the hand gesture. How many of you have actually ever opened ISO 9000? I'm not looking to shame anybody. I'm just curious how many people actually have even seen it by show of hands.
So, yeah. I'm not seeing any boy. Oh, okay. There's
And that was
Steve's.
me. And I have it up on my screen right now. So, all right. Well, that's kind of what I was afraid of, right? Is that no hands would go up.
Yeah,
But good. Well, then it explains why people are here, and hopefully you're going to learn something good today.
Well, don't even know how to fucking do it. That's why.
Yep, I can hear somebody there. Make
that's
sure you're
Russ.
muted. Yeah, Russ, we can hear you. There we go.
Yeah. All right. So again, it's hard to sometimes it's hard to explain, and because the everybody wants to know, why did these requirements get written that are in ISO 13485, for med device, in 9001, where did they, the requirements come from? Well, they come from these fundamental concepts and explaining how to apply them in a quality management system, right? So if you understand these fundamental concepts, you're going to often meet the intent of ISO 9001 or 1345 or any 14001. All these kind of management systems flow from these fundamental concepts. Okay, now that's the concepts, but even more so are these principles, and the 7 principles of a management system, or 7 principles of the quality management system. Right? First one is customer focus, right? Do you understand your customer? And are you striving to meet their expectations? And if you do that, you have to identify things like customer value, customer, why they come back to you, what are their desires, those types of things, right? And then we go on to the next principle of leadership. And so your organization has people that help lead it. Now, in the past, the previous edition of 9000, this was actually called management, and we in 2015 updated it to leadership. Again, some of the purposes is because leaders provide a direction for your organization, and that's a key principle of a quality management system, that you provide direction, taking people in a place with your goals, mission, vision, all of these pieces. Okay. The next principle coming down, and there is no real relative importance of these things. The order that they're in just happens to be the order that they were listed in. We don't have one above the other. And so then as we move forward to the engagement of people, people are your biggest resource in most organizations, right? And so being able to engage the people, um, and empower them is essential to, bringing your organization's capability and creating and delivering value, that piece. If you don't engage the people, and we talk about lots of times we get in getting buy-in, right? And that's really the engagement of people. So as you move things forward, that you'll take those things. Now, and I'm sorry, I should have introduced this section with some additional pieces, right? So these principles, and everything is organized in the same way, each of these sections, for these principles. In 9000, it has a statement of what that principle is, what it means. It provides a rationale of, why you need this, in a quality management system. It then outlines the benefits to your organization, and then gives you possible actions that you can do to achieve, those benefits. Now, I don't know about you, but often organizations struggle, and the quality management and quality leadership often struggles, connecting with the rest of the business on why we need to do this quality management stuff. Most of the time, they just think it's about compliance. But do you see compliance in any of these things? It's not. It has to do with running the business effectively. having that customer focus, providing leadership, engaging your people. Okay. And so if you already had this written down for you of what it was, why you want it, the benefits of it, now you can explain it to leadership, and then the actions you can take, doesn't that provide some value? And bringing that back, now this is why you should really take out and read ISO 9000. Okay. And sorry, Steve, I sometimes I get so wrapped up in what the content is and all of these pieces and trying to explain what those are, I forget that we even need to come back and explain the value and show people what's there so that they can get that value out of it. Okay. All right. So we've gone through customer focus. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about engaging the people. And the next piece is, and lots of people can talk about this because this is one of the key concepts that comes first in ISO 9001, is the process approach, right? And that a process approach engages and sets the interrelation of processes. That you do some planning, you take some action, you check that action achieved what you wanted to achieve, and then you act or adjust that process in order to better achieve what you wanted as an outcome, right? So that plan, do, check, act cycle of the process approach. Now, one of the things that 9001 also added into it was risk-based approach to the controls within that quality management system. So the process approach integrated with risk-based approach gives you the best results, right? And that really is the check and act piece, is that risk-based approach. All right. As we continue through the principles, then we move towards improvement. Notice that this doesn't say continuous or continual or, any, modifiers on it, but it is just simply improvement. And so the idea here, again, as we work through the process approach, is we're taking actions to improve the outcomes, right? And successful organizations really do have that focus on improvement. We're always going to get better. We talk about maturity and maturity modeling and getting that much better. Okay? So that's the improvement piece. All right? Then we moved on to the evidence-based decision making. And really this is about, you're going to gather data, right? It's not just, I feel like we could do this, or I feel like we could do that, but rather gathering and evaluating the data to produce those desired results, because that's giving you the highest probability of achieving what you're setting out for and making that decision making, understanding what the risk is, all of those types of things. You need some data. Okay. And then the final principle that we can talk through here is relationship management. Now, in the past, this might have been called, supply chain management or those types of things, but it talks about relationships, and this is where we go back to those relevant interested parties. Who are we connected with, and managing the relationships. So your suppliers, your customers, all of these types of things. Again, in order to gain the information, communicate what's going on, make any changes, all of these things are necessary for relationship management to have a good quality management system, effective improvements, all of those types of things. Now, I think there was a couple, and Steve is putting in the chat some things, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's really the principles. And Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or what we've talked about with regard to these 7 principles, or if people have questions around those.
Yeah, no, like I said, it's just one of those things that I think we talk about these concepts, and I don't think we ever ask, well, where did those get established, right? Because they're so key, foundational, really, right, to whatever standard, quality standard you're using. Um, but in 9,000, like you said, it's just laid out so nicely where there's this statement, what is this thing? What's the rationale behind it? What are the benefits? And here's things you could do to take action on that, and it, you know, I like when, I like people come to hear me talk at various, events and things like that. And I think they're sometimes wondering, gee, oh, is this guy so smart? He came up with all this stuff, and I didn't. It's all right there. I'm just trying to share it and get more people interested in it. I didn't invent these concepts. It's been laid out by a group of people at ISO and to help us get this stuff. So again, I just really encourage people, go get a copy of 9,000.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, as we're, working on the revisions of the next version, and even as we finished up back in 2015, the current edition of the standard, sometimes even the writers of the standard lose focus on some of these principles. It's the reason some of many of the concepts are being expanded, because to help the group that's doing the revisions to 9001, make sure that the standard is well aligned with all of the concepts and principles, in making these alignments, because sometimes you forget this. I honestly, I often say that if I have these quality management principles in mind, I don't really much need 9001, because I'm already going to do those requirements if I'm focused on these principles and using the concepts that are provided. You're going to meet the requirements. Now, you obviously want to have 9001 because you're going to get audited to that. But I think if, when you have this understanding of the concepts, and these pieces that fit together in a quality management system, the requirements, because you got to come back to it. The requirements in 9001 is just the minimum things you can do. That doesn't necessarily give you the best performing organization. These concepts, though, and principles, I think, flow through to give you a much better organization than just meeting the minimum requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat known for railing against the checklist mentality, right? And I think that comes from only being aware of 9001 or 1345 and not being aware of this stuff in 9,000, right? Because then you see, oh, well, look, 9,001 gives us a bunch of requirements. I can turn that into a checklist. Check, 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 check. Gee, why doesn't quality magically occur afterwards, right? And it's because you may not have correctly implemented if you didn't understand the intent, which is all in 9,000, right? So I love your point about you could almost get away with reading only 9,000 and probably have huge impact on your quality culture without even looking at 9001.
For sure, absolutely. Okay. I'm trying to organize my stuff here. So, just wanted to move on to, that third section that we talked about, that in 9000, that talks about developing your QMS. Okay. So, I mean, now we've laid out, you have these principles, some associated concepts you have to understand up front. Now, we're going to give you some instructions about developing your QMS. Now, again, 9001 gives the requirements and outlines those pieces. But if I have an understanding of this, and these pieces, and this is where some of these basic things come from, I'm already going to be focused on meeting the requirements of 9001, right? And so the QMS model, okay, and we're talking about the model of having a system and having some underlying processes, right? So you have a set of processes that then become your quality management system. So SOPs, that SOP level, that have have some other procedures and work instructions and forms and all of this stuff. what we come back to in, the basic ISO things is say what you're going to do and then show that you did what you said you were going to do. And so you create the system that says what you're going to do and with its processes, and you have forms and, work instructions and forms, and then your people do those activities that you write the information down, and then you can show that you did what you said you were going to do. Okay. And that's really that basic QMS model of providing processes and ways to do things, and then being able to show that you did that the way you said you were going to do it. Okay. The next piece is that development piece of putting in a QMS. And what this is really talking about is putting those processes into place and then putting them into action and then seeing where they need that adjustment. And this is what we talked about earlier in the maturity modeling and that kind of stuff, is that as you develop your QMS, what I often see is people are like, well, I'm not ready to release that procedure yet because it isn't perfect. And I want to tell them, I don't care. Just release it, because the whole concept of having a quality management system and developing it is to put those procedures in place and then see where we need to make the adjustments. Right? It's not to have it perfect from the get-go. It's to continue to do that improvements. Okay. And that's where we come from in standards and excellence models in the last piece. Okay, so you have standards, 9001, 1345, 14,001, all of these standards, and these other management systems. And then you start to develop those procedures and follow the excellence modules, right? You look for best practices or good practices out there. In addition, the many of the writers of 9000, 9001 then participate in the development of the other 10,000 level standards for improvement. So technical aspects of documentation and specific areas then are covered in that 10,000 series of documents, as well as the guidance documents of TS 9002 and some other pieces. So all of these things are working towards developing with those other standards and guidance and excellence models. You understand? I mean, this is there's so much information in ISO 9000. I often want to shake people is, why are you not looking at this? Why are you not, why does everybody want to ignore 9000 and just think it has definitions when it has so much more information? Any comments, Steve?
No, I'm good. I was trying to think of a way of, if I could in the chat, give some examples of the 10,000 series, but there's a bunch of them. Right? But it's just, again, you should be aware that if you're trying to figure out, all right, so how do I do customer satisfaction? Well, it turns out there's three of them, three 10,000 level documents related to customer satisfaction. How do I do monitoring and measuring, or how do I develop metrics? There's a guideline on that, right? You don't have to invent all this stuff yourself. You're not sitting there swinging in the breeze wondering, geez, they put all this cryptic stuff in front of me and then they don't tell me how to do it. Actually, if you look for it, it's there.
And in many cases, I'll also say that TC 176 does a pretty good job with their public site as well to provide some additional information. As you work, working in the standards world, I get connected to a lot of the people that can answer the questions. What you have to understand is that anybody can, put information back to their standards bodies. So you can contact ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, or ASQ is also a big participant in 176. Contact them and say, hey, I have a question on this standard. Can you get this back to the working group or the TAG, which is the technical advisory group in the US for these things? These are ways to ask questions. And most of the time we end up pointing people back to, well, consider looking at 10,000, these 10,000 series for additional information in the technical, because that's where the experts have put their opinions, put those pieces down. Yeah. Okay. I'd just like to hear from somebody else other than Steve and myself. Is there anybody else that, has this kind of experience with ISO 9000? Do you think that this is valuable? Come on, I know some of you guys, don't be so shy. Zion?
So
Andrew?
let me do a show of hands again. So for how many of you, this stuff we're going over, how much of this is brand new, all to you?
Is it brand new for you? Raise your hand if it's brand new. If you didn't know 9000 had this stuff.
Or that the 10,000 series existed and all that kind of stuff? Okay, there's one. There we go. Jim broke the ice. Okay.
You know, when you're involved in doing this speaking and that kind of stuff, and Steve and I speak at a lot of different places, and try to break this down, that sometimes I I think that maybe we're getting a little, I'll even call it esoteric, or pie in the sky um, type pieces. And I think it's unfortunate that people will not look at these higher level documents to understand the pieces. Because honestly, this is what Steve and I use to teach from often is, I mean, 9001, 1345 gives you the requirements. You can read that stuff. But understanding the why, understanding the pieces behind it has so much value to it. And that's really what ISO 9000 is that why piece.
And not just our ability to teach, for me, this has been part of my own journey in, refining my knowledge, in quality. I didn't know this stuff right off the start. And actually, there's a lot of stuff that I realized that I learned anecdotally, early on in my career that I now realize was wrong. Right. And as I become a better student of these things and being aware of them and paying attention to them has really sometimes created fundamental shifts in my thinking, where I go, holy cow, I can't believe I've been, back early on, I was advising this way and I was wrong because it actually the intent is here. So, every once in a while, right, you got to kind of step back, leave your ego at the door and go, what don't I know? Right. I mean, smart people know that there's things they don't know, and we should be comfortable with that.
All right. I just again want to advocate that even the current edition as is provides so much value that it's well worth the little bit of price that it costs. The couple $100 that it might cost you to get that edition of the standard. Many of us can get our organizations to pay for it, right? And so, just a huge amount of value, because this is where auditors go to understand, this during their training. And so if you have this level of understanding, you can be able to discuss this with your auditors, I think, in a much more effective way in understanding where the requirements come from. Okay? So we kind of got through that first half and talking about ISO 9000 as it exists today. What I want to shift to then is, again, where ISO 9000 is going. And so I'm just going to talk on this title slide here for a second, because much of the principles really are staying the same. There's no need to update those. I think the committee is pretty solid in understanding that the fundamentals are still the fundamentals, and there's no real change necessary there. As far as the definitions go, and the stuff that's in Clause 3, there are some additional definitions. There are, some small modifications to some of the definitions and terms and concept diagrams. I will tell you, in the current edition of the committee draft, there's a whole section on terminology that comes from government. And the reason for that is there's a whole set of terms. It's a new standard that was developed for government quality management. And so because that new standard came into being, TC 176 also owns it. And so those terms are coming into ISO 9000. It's not meant to confuse you or think that there was a gravity change or anything like that. It's just some of the new standards. And there were some, other updates to other standards within the TC 176 family in those 10,000 series where we needed some definitions brought in. ISO 9000 is meant to have all of the terminology of all of the standards that are in TC 176. So 9000, 9001, and all those 10,000 level series of documents are included in the terminology that's provided in ISO 9000. All right. What I really want to cover in this second part of the webinar here has to do with the update to the concepts. Okay. And I'm just going to go back a few slides. I should have put it in here again. But these fundamental concepts, right? There's 5 of them in the current edition. Quality management system, context of the organization, interested parties, and support. Okay. Now we're going to go forward into the concepts that are in. So quality and quality management system are still there. But in the middle, we added quality management. We want to explain these in detail, these concepts of how we take you from the concept of quality and achieving quality into the management of that. And then we can take you into the processes and interrelated pieces that make up a system. Okay. We wanted to talk about continual improvement rather than just improvement. And then we start adding these other pieces that are important to establishing and maintaining a quality management system, like quality planning. Okay, we need to have that concept so that we understand that it's not something that just appears, and we want to have quality planning. Okay, then the concept of quality assurance comes up. What does good mean? Those types of things. Quality control. What controls do you put into place within the processes to achieve quality? Managing processes or process management. Okay, how do I, control my documentation? All of those types of things. How do I implement, the processes? Okay, and then we start with a whole bunch of not new concepts, but updated concepts and connections. Okay, as the user survey was done by TC 176, these are concepts that are coming up in organizations. They want to understand how to do that. So, a concept of an integrated management system. How do I make my quality management system work with my information security management system and my environmental management system and my health and safety system? All of these things have to work together in an integrated management system. Okay. And this is, again, the initial concepts are being explained in ISO 9000, but there's an entire new group that's now working on how do we integrate management systems from the ISO top levels of Technical Management Board. Okay. And so we're starting to work on those things. The previous edition also did have the context of the organization, but that's expanded. And now we've added pieces about the organization's quality culture. And then we're going into things, the concepts like a circular economy. How does what my organization outputs and then my users use it, and then what happens to it? What's the next steps of that as it works through the economy? Okay, and how can I facilitate that? right? People talk about environmental impacts and those types of things. Circular economy is a big concept in there. Then we can start talking about emerging technology. I think many people have heard, are excited about the possibilities of artificial intelligence and machine learning and these other emerging technologies as we continue to make advancements. How are those being used, and the risks and opportunities that come from those? Okay. Then we can talk about the concept of innovation. What does innovation mean? Innovation is not necessarily new or emerging technologies, but it could be using existing information and technologies in a new way. And what it means to do then the innovations, right? Risk has become a big concept for people to understand. But one of the things that we missed, I think, back in 2015 was explaining the fundamental concept of risk-based thinking. And this was not explained well in 9001, and it certainly wasn't even addressed in ISO 9000. So this was one of the big ones that had to get added in the next edition of ISO 9000, is explaining what risk-based thinking is. And of course, that then you have to start with the concept of risk. All right. And I'm not done yet. So the other one had 5, and we're already up to a lot more than that. And we're still things. So change management, understanding how to implement change and how that works together within the system. Okay. The piece of interested parties needs to be explained because, again, auditors and other people are asking, who's your interested parties? And this whole concept of then a modifier in front of it, what's a relevant interested party versus maybe an irrelevant interested party? Stockholders might be interested parties, but they're not necessarily relevant to your customer needs, right? All these types of things. All right. Then we move into the customer experience and understanding what your customers are seeing. Now, many times organizations will talk about customer satisfaction, and that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. Rather, because if you're a police officer and you arrest somebody, you might consider the person that you're arresting a customer, right? They're not going to be satisfied with their experience probably, but you can talk about what their customer experience is versus somebody else's customer's experience and these types of things, and understanding what's a good customer experience versus a customer being satisfied. Okay. Organizations also need to understand knowledge management. And so a big part of this is, how does an organization manage their own knowledge and their know-how on how to do something? And you have to manage that. When somebody retires, you cannot lose that. If somebody were to disappear from your organization and go get hired to another organization, you don't want all of that knowledge to go away. You don't want all of your customers to now go over to that other, company because somebody moved from your organization. You need to manage the knowledge that your organization has. Okay. Then we can talk about information.
Just a quick note or anecdote on knowledge management, right? And that it's something that needs to be planned, right? When you're understanding your resourcing organization. I worked at a place once, and one of the departments suddenly realized that a quarter of their employees were 4 years away from retirement age.
Yeah.
Right? What would have been the impact of losing a quarter of the department, right,
Yeah.
within a relatively short period of time? And we were talking about people who had like 30 years experience with the company. Just think of the impact to the organization if they hadn't figured that out. And they, 4 years sounds like a lot, but that they were like in a panic. How are we going to capture this in the next 4 years?
And knowledge databases and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing that in many organizations, including, organizations like FDA, where, through COVID, they wore out a lot of their workers. And then there's a lot of people that, have started working remotely and they all of a sudden decide, hey, this is great. And FDA wants them to come back. No, I'm going to go work for industry now. And you start losing that experience. So you got to manage the knowledge. Okay. Information aspects. There's a lot of new regulations with regard to controlling information. I think many of us are probably understanding the European requirements for the General Data Practices Regulation. And what information does your organization hold? How do they keep it secure? How do they keep from losing that information? All of that type of stuff. I can't tell you the number of customers that our clients we go to, and they say, "Well, I know we did it, but I'm not sure where it went to." Okay, we don't have that information anymore. Then, Steve, I think you said somewhere towards the beginning, if it's not documented, it doesn't exist, right? Well, if you can't find it, it doesn't exist, right? And you're going to have to redo something. All those things of managing information. And then the final new one that's coming in is people. It's not really new, but again, it's the people aspects. How do you manage people? Sometimes we call this the HR pieces, but engaging people, creating that quality culture, all of these things, these concepts start to move together, and you need to finally come back and manage those most important resources of people, and the people aspects of it need to be explained in some of the fundamental concepts of how people are important to your quality management system. Okay, so you can see we went from 5 to let's see, how many were there? There's 6 there, plus another 8, that's 14, and another 8, which is 22. So going from 5 fundamental concepts to 22 fundamental concepts, you can see how much more content there is now in ISO 9000. And this is why we wanted to have this webinar, encourage you. You can start now in the 2015 edition because it certainly provides value, provides information, but there's going to be so much more coming in the next edition as these fundamental concepts get expanded. So that's where we're at, Steve, and that's what we have for our webinar today. Are there any other follow-ups and concepts?
Yeah, we got about 10 minutes left for Q&A. So what's on people's minds?
And honestly, guys, guys and gals, you don't need to limit this necessarily ISO 9000. 9001 is also under its revision, and I'm participating in that working group. Soon to start is going to be the revision of ISO 31000, which is the kind of granddaddy risk management. And I also participate, obviously, in TC 210, which is 1345, as well as the other, medical device kind of standards. So if you want to ask about those, we can take those questions as well. Anybody?
Hey, Mark, how much of this is going to, obviously 9001 is going through its revision now.
Yeah.
How much of this is going to be in the new revision of the 5 to 22 concepts? How many of them are going to make it to 9001?
All of them is all I want to say, Joel. And it's, to me, it's a good thing. So what started happening, and it's happened, the 2015 edition, obviously it was 9000 2015 and 9001 2015. They got published basically together. And there was as 9001 has become delayed, there were some thoughts that maybe 9000 should also be delayed. And many of us said, no, 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 no. We need to have these things published ahead of 9001 being published so that these fundamentals and concepts are already out there. And when the requirements of 9001 are updated for a lot of these concepts, that information's already been published in 9000. And so you're gonna see some updates to 9001 that are based on the updates of bringing these concepts out there and together. You know, the 9001, one of the big ideas that's I think coming through that revision is the separation of risks and opportunities into the two separate concepts of risks and opportunities, right? And so that's a lot of that is based on the fundamentals and the concepts that are coming through in ISO 9000. Does that help you?
Yeah, I was asked, or because they had that amendment that kind of touched on one of them.
You know, yeah, there's a lot of people that still are upset about that. You know, the amendment that was done to all of the quality or all of the management system standards with regard to, you know, determining if environmental is a relevant, you know, concern for your
Yeah,
system and that piece. And I think, and Joel, you guys do 14,001 already.
right.
And so you brought in some of those pieces. The reason that that amendment was pushed through without much fanfare is that really, from a management system standpoint, that didn't change anything. It just highlighted one particular piece because you already had to determine the relevant or the concerns of your relevant interested parties. And so that was just bringing that particular one to the forefront because of the connection to um, you know those concepts out there. And ISO's push forward to engage you know people with the environmental pieces that comes from you know some of the international commitments. I don't think that was a big deal, but these concepts are going to drive many of the requirements that are in 9001 and probably explain many of the requirements that have existed in the previous editions.
Yeah, you see a little flavor of the old, um, whatever, 08 was the last one or the previous one.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're bringing back some of that stuff. It seems
Well,
like.
and I think honestly, the group that's doing and they're two separate groups, so it's they're actually a different subcommittee of TC 176. So they're two different groups that work on the two standards, right? One is working on 9000, the other one's working on 9001. There are a few of us that cross over between the two, but not very many. But I think what happened was after the 2015 edition and the feedback that they got, there was a whole bunch of requirements that kind of popped up and people didn't understand, you know, what was behind them. What's the concept of that's driving this particular requirement? And so that's why 9000 is adding so many of these things is because they got the feedback from the other side, so to speak, of saying, hey, these concepts need to be explained. So when we're writing requirements around them, people understand what that means. And so that's where a bunch of the adds to 9000 come from. And so it helps you explain the requirements in 9001 that much easier. Okay? Does that make sense, Joel?
Yep, I was muted there. Yeah, it does.
Okay. Other people? This is your opportunity, and we only have them once a quarter now, so you know, maybe we need to have them more often, but we're glad to answer any questions.
Anyone have any aha moments throughout this?
You guys are still there, right? Can can we have everybody and if you can't do it, I understand. But lots of times we try to catch pictures from the things that we have, and of course, when we're not sitting in a room, it's hard to capture a picture. But perhaps if people don't mind, and Steve and I have our cameras on, if you don't mind, if you turn your camera on so we can do a screen capture of the people that attend, just to see it, if you don't mind. That would be great. Anybody? Andrew, you're gray, and Joel, you're gray, even though you're Joel Gray.
That is my picture.
Yeah.
It's quite literal.
Okay. Good to see you. Yeah, if your camera doesn't work, Andrew, that's all right. Doesn't look, it looks like everybody else is shy. Welcome, everybody. There's Jim. We can see you. All right.
I grabbed the screen capture, so
I was going to say, Steve, can you
we
grab
get
that?
all these
That'd be great.
happy, knowledgeable people now.
Yeah. So, again, Steve and I do a lot of speaking and bringing information to, the various people. We're glad that you guys are here. Again, I think that Steve is saying you're in the know now, so to speak, right? You know where to get some of these things from. I think the slide that I have up has our contact information, our website, and that kind of stuff. I will say, there's not Joel. You're one of our clients. Some of the rest of the people, that you can contact us anytime, and we'll be glad to answer your questions. So if people, have, say, what is this 9,000 and why are you so hot on it? Connect them with us, and we'll be glad to answer their questions of why this is important, stuff, how you can make your organization better by having a connection to ISO 9000. Okay. All right. If there's no other questions, I think we're going to sign off. We'll end the webinar there. Steve, any parting remarks here?
No, nothing more to add for today.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us.
Yep. Thank you.
So long, everybody.